The year is 1839, a pivotal moment in history. On the shores of Human, a dramatic scene unfolds, one that would alter the course of nations. Heaps of chests, filled not with tea or silk, but with opium, are piled high. This opium, a product of British trade, had been flooding into China, causing widespread addiction and social disruption. Chinese officials, acting on the emperor's decree, set fire to the illicit cargo. The emperor, determined to protect his people and sovereignty, had ordered the destruction of over 1,000 tons of opium. Smoke billows into the sky, a visible symbol of defiance against British pressure. The air is thick with the scent of burning opium, a poignant reminder of the cost of this toxic trade. This act, a costly sacrifice of confiscated opium, marked a turning point. It was not just a physical destruction of goods, but a powerful statement against the exploitation and manipulation by foreign powers. It was a bold declaration China would no longer tolerate the devastating trade forced upon it. The Chinese government, under immense pressure, chose to stand up against the British Empire, despite the potential consequences. This was the spark that ignited the Opium Wars. The destruction of the opium was a catalyst, leading to a series of conflicts that would reshape the relationship between China and the Western world. The Opium Wars were not just about trade, but about sovereignty, dignity, and the right of a nation to protect its people from harm. This moment in 1839 was the beginning of a long and tumultuous struggle, one that would leave a lasting impact on global history. For centuries, China had enjoyed a favorable balance of trade. European demand for Chinese tea, silk, and porcelain was insatiable. Silver flowed into the Middle Kingdom, enriching the Qing dynasty. However, the British East India Company, hungry for profit, sought a commodity to reverse this flow. They found their answer in opium, grown in their Indian territories. The highly addictive drug, banned in China except for medicinal purposes, found a ready market. Smuggling networks flourished and silver began to flow out of China, destabilizing the economy and fueling social problems. The destruction of opium at Human angered the British government. This act of defiance by the Chinese authorities was seen as a direct challenge to British interests and pride. The British, who had been profiting immensely from the opium trade, were not willing to let this go unpunished. They demanded compensation and access to Chinese markets. The British government, driven by both economic interests and a sense of national pride, sent diplomats to negotiate with the Qing officials. However, the Chinese were firm in their stance against the opium trade, leading to a deadlock in negotiations. When diplomacy failed, Britain, confident in its naval superiority, declared war in 1839. The British Navy, with its advanced ships and weaponry, was a formidable force. They believed that a show of military strength would quickly bring the Chinese to their knees. The First Opium War was a clash of civilizations, a modern, industrialized power against an ancient empire slow to adapt. The British, with their industrial advancements, represented the New World Order, while the Qing dynasty clung to its traditional ways, unprepared for the onslaught. British warships, armed with superior firepower, easily outmaneuvered the outdated Chinese Navy. The Chinese ships, built for a different era, stood little chance against the technologically advanced British fleet. The battles were often one-sided, with the British emerging victorious time and again. Coastal cities fell, and the Qing court was forced to the negotiating table. The British forces captured key ports and cities, crippling the Chinese economy and supply lines. The Qing officials, realizing the futility of further resistance, had no choice but to seek peace. The Treaty of Nanjing, signed in 1842, marked a humiliating defeat for China, and ushered in an era of Western dominance. This treaty not only forced China to cede Hong Kong to the British, but also opened up several ports to foreign trade, significantly altering the balance of power in the region. The once mighty Qing dynasty found itself at the mercy of Western powers, setting the stage for further conflicts and concessions in the years to come. The Treaty of Nanjing was the first of many unequal treaties imposed on China by Western powers. It forced China to cede Hong Kong to Britain, open 5 ports to foreign trade, and pay a hefty indemnity for the destroyed opium and war expenses. The treaty also granted extraterritoriality to British citizens, exempting them from Chinese law. These concessions severely undermined Chinese sovereignty and fueled resentment towards the West. The treaty was a bitter pill to swallow. a symbol of China's decline and the West's growing power. The Treaty of Nanjing did little to quell the tensions between China and the West. In 1856, the seizure of a Chinese-owned ship, the Arrow, by British authorities in Canton, sparked the Second Opium War. France, eager to expand its influence in the region, joined Britain in the conflict. The outcome was another devastating defeat for China. The Treaty of Tianjin, signed in 1858, further eroded Chinese sovereignty, opening more ports to foreign trade, legalizing the opium trade, and granting Western missionaries greater freedom to operate within China. The Opium Wars exposed the weaknesses of the Qing dynasty and fueled internal unrest. The Taiping Rebellion, which erupted in 1850, was one of the deadliest conflicts in human history. Led by Hong Xiuquan, a self-proclaimed younger brother of Jesus Christ, the Taiping rebels sought to overthrow the Qing dynasty and establish a heavenly kingdom of great peace. The rebellion, fueled by social unrest and anti-Manchu sentiment, raged for over a decade, claiming millions of lives and further weakening the Qing dynasty. The Opium Wars and their aftermath had a devastating impact on Chinese society. The influx of cheap opium led to widespread addiction, crippling productivity, and tearing apart families. The once proud nation found itself in the grip of a national crisis. The economy, destabilized by the forced trade and war indemnities, struggled to recover. The social fabric of China was unraveling, leaving the people demoralized and disillusioned. The Qing dynasty, once a symbol of power and stability, was now seen as weak and incompetent. Its inability to protect its people and its territory from foreign aggression led many to question the legitimacy of its rule. The mandate of heaven, the ancient Chinese belief that justified imperial rule, seemed to be slipping away from the Qing. Internal corruption and factionalism further weakened the dynasty from within. The once mighty empire was crumbling both from external pressures and internal decay. The Opium Wars marked the beginning of what China calls its century of humiliation. For the next 100 years, China would be dominated by foreign powers, forced to grant concessions, cede territory, and endure economic exploitation. The Opium Wars left an indelible scar on the Chinese psyche, a constant reminder of national humiliation, and a driving force behind the desire for national rejuvenation. The Opium Wars had a profound impact on the course of Chinese history. The humiliation of defeat and the desire to restore China's lost glory fueled a wave of reform movements and revolutions. Intellectuals and reformers began to question traditional Confucian values and looked to the West for ideas on modernization and national strengthening. The Opium Wars, in a way, sowed the seeds of revolution, leading to the overthrow of the Qing dynasty in 1911 and the birth of the Republic of China. The Opium Wars were not just a conflict between China and the West, they were a microcosm of a larger global shift. These wars, fought over the trade of opium, were emblematic of the changing tides of power and influence in the 19th century. They marked the beginning of the decline of the Old World Order, where empires like China had flourished for centuries. The West, with its industrial might and imperial ambitions, was on the rise. The Opium Wars were a harbinger of things to come, a sign of the shifting balance of power that would define the coming century. The world was changing rapidly, and China, once a center of global power, was struggling to adapt. The traditional ways of governance, trade, and societal structure were being challenged by new ideas and technologies from the West. The Industrial Revolution had given Western nations unprecedented economic and military power, allowing them to project their influence across the globe. Imperial ambitions drove these nations to seek new markets and resources, often at the expense of established powers like China. The Opium Wars were just one example of this larger trend, but they were a significant one. They highlighted the vulnerabilities of the old empires and the relentless advance of the new. The shifting balance of power was not just a political or military phenomenon, it was also economic and cultural. Western ideas, technologies, and ways of life began to permeate societies around the world, changing them in profound ways. The rise of the West and the decline of the East was a complex and multifaceted process, driven by a multitude of factors. The Opium Wars were a key moment in this process, symbolizing the broader changes that were taking place. As the 19th century progressed, the world would continue to see the rise of Western powers and the challenges faced by traditional empires like China. The struggle to adapt to these changes was not easy, and it would shape the course of history for decades to come. The rise of the West brought with it new opportunities and challenges, both for the Western nations themselves and for the rest of the world. The decline of the East, meanwhile, was a story of resilience and adaptation, as these ancient civilizations sought to find their place in a rapidly changing world. The legacy of this period is still felt today as the balance of power continues to shift and evolve. China, once a center of global power, was struggling to adapt. The story of the Opium Wars and the rise of the West is a reminder of the dynamic and ever-changing nature of global power and influence. It is a story of conflict and change, of decline and resurgence, and of the enduring quest for power and influence in a complex and interconnected world.